Now, if there's one thing that's immune to a deadly virus, it's identity politics. Even in the middle of a pandemic, even when half the nation is in lockdown, the left-wing media never misses a chance to disparage Conservatives and Conservative governments. And as we've seen with the Sydney outbreak, this leftist opportunism comes with a dollop of schadenfreude as well.
Take, for example, ABC Melbourne host Virginia Trioli, who tweeted on Friday, "So now it's a national emergency. The refusal of New South Wales to take this seriously, properly seriously, and adopt the lessons learned from other outbreaks and other shutdowns is bordering on unforgivable."
And she also wrote, or should I say scolded, "If your leaders won't require you to, do it yourselves. Stay home." Notwithstanding that this is exactly what the New South Wales government is telling its citizens to do.
But just over a month ago, Trioli herself was suggesting hardline lockdowns had passed their use-by date.
Well, now that we're about to lift the main restrictions of Victorian lockdown number 4, two of Australia's leading public health experts want to ask a very serious question today. Is it time to stop the hard lockdowns? Is it time to do lockdowns smarter? These two very thoughtful leaders want to start a discussion about how we can manage these continuing inevitable outbreaks of infections without shutting cities down, without closing schools down, without doing lockdowns the same tough way each time.
As for Trioli telling New South Wales residents that their leaders had failed them, compare that to her treatment of Victorian opposition leader Michael O'Brien in August last year when he called for Premier Daniel Andrews to resign.
My listeners are just screaming at me this morning. How important do you think a uniform as well? But let me move on to something that my listeners are just screaming at me this morning. How important do you think a unified front is for Victorians right now? And if Victorians see a government under sustained criticism by an opposition like this right now, do you worry that it'll weaken their resolve and it'll compromise this final lockdown? Will you feel at least in part responsible if this lockdown fails, if people arc up and don't do the right thing because they've heard the words and the rhetoric coming from your mouth and this lockdown fails, because that lack of a unanimous purpose is communicated to the public in the middle of a pandemic and people decide, well, bugger it, I don't need to believe in Daniel Andrews, I won't do the right thing.
The sin of not believing Dan Andrews? Trioli's terminology is most revealing, especially because in October of last year, she wrote in a puff piece, quote, "The politics of staying the course was incredibly hard. Daniel Andrews had every reason to blink, but he didn't."
And then this. It shouldn't be surprising that in the midst of a pandemic, we still find ourselves mired in politics. I suppose the stakes are too high for us not to be. The hardship, the loss of life, the preventable deaths, the economic destruction, the psychological toll. But let's be blunt for a moment. Daniel Andrews plays a mean game of chicken. Chicken?
Oh, jeez. Victorian resident and former ABC journalist Zoe Daniel tweeted, "Sydney, you need proper hard lockdown. Also, the problem with redirecting vaccine is what happens when we get another outbreak seeded from New South Wales? What a mess. This whole thing is just a complete poop show."
And ABC Melbourne host Raph Epstein tweeted, quote, "We just did 30 minutes of talkback and people in Melbourne and Victoria are angry, white, hot, furious."
Why are they fostering this viciousness? You can well understand why journalist Hannah Ryan tweeted yesterday, slowly being forced to mute all Melbourne-based ABC employees.
Very, very smart move there. And there was no better example of leftist hypocrisy this week than the Project host, Lisa Wilkinson. Contrast the way this purported feminist refers to two premiers.
Gladys has been telling us for days that there's all of these green shoots, but we watched them wither on the vine today with her words saying that, or predicting that in the coming days, it's only going to get worse. And when you looked at her body language, we're just imagining how much worse it is going to be. I wonder if right now she really regrets being so disparaging about Dan Andrews and how he's handled things.
That's right. Wilkinson condescendingly refers to the New South Wales Premier as Gladys, but doesn't do the same to the Victorian Premier. And then Wilkinson went on to make this nutty claim.
She consistently says that she's following the health advice, and there's a lot of people in New South Wales right now who think if that's the health advice that she's been following from the beginning, then either the health advice is flawed or she's got some other masters that we don't know about.
Ooh, conspiracy theory. Wilkinson provided no evidence for this supposed conspiracy. This was just an unjustified slur. Now let's compare how she treats another woman leader, this time a Labor one.
You've admitted to having bouts of anxiety when you were Prime Minister. What led to that?
Being the first woman, a minority parliament and the like, some pretty critical media treatment.
Notice Wilkinson nodding her head in sympathy when Gillard complained about her treatment by the media. In fact, Gillard can count on the kid glove treatment whenever a leftist journalist interviews her. Trioli again.
The famous misogyny speech delivered in the House by the then Prime Minister Julia Gillard. You could attend a conference every week, really, about women and leadership, or at least you could pre-COVID. But it's rare to hear candid first-person accounts from the women who actually do run the joint. The witch hunt that will go on in relation to a woman leadership role that might not happen in relation to blokes. And these are all experiences that the women you interview have had, Julia.
But when it comes to Berejiklian, like any woman in the coalition, it's open slather. Now, don't get us wrong. We don't believe anyone should be free of criticism because of their gender or for any other reason. But on this show, we have castigated Gladys Berejiklian for her failings plenty of times. That's why we cannot abide the sickening hypocrisy of those media figures who condemn misogyny yet relish the chance to kick a conservative woman in the guts. And who was the journalist deploring this kind of behaviour when she gave the Andrew Ollie lecture in 2013?
Now, as a woman in the media, it has long saddened me that while we delight in covering public issues of overt sexism, possibly the hottest topic in media over the last 12 months, the media itself can be every bit as guilty of treating women entirely differently to men. And in terms of our audience, the cliche is so often true. It is women who can turn out to be women's harshest critics.
Which is perfectly excusable to the left when the woman in question is a conservative.